Hello, my dear friend. Arrival in ancient Egypt. Why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. The first thing that hits you is the heat. It is not the kind of warm summer day you know. It is a wall of scorching sunlight pressing down on your skin, baking the sand beneath your feet until it feels like stepping on fire. There is no shade, no tall buildings, no modern comforts, only an endless horizon of golden desert, and in the far distance, the slow green ribbon of the Nile, the lifeline of Egypt. You blink against the blinding brightness. The air is dry, gritty, filled with the fine powder of sand that clings to your lips and nostrils. Sweat begins to drip down your forehead almost immediately. You look around and realize you are surrounded by a world utterly unlike your own. To your left, you see a small cluster of mud brick houses, walls the color of clay, flat roofs with bundles of reeds stacked on top. Smoke rises from small fires, and the smell of bread baking in clay ovens drifts toward you. Women in linen dresses grind grain with heavy stone querns, their arms moving in a rhythm that looks both ancient and exhausting. Barefoot children chase each other, their laughter sharp and strange in a language you barely recognize. Ancient Egyptian. A man notices you. His skin is bronzed from years under the sun, his hair shaved close to his head, a simple white linen kilt tied around his waist. His eyes narrow suspiciously. You realize how out of place you look, your modern clothes, your confusion, the way you stare. You try to speak, but the words feel useless. They do not understand your language, and you do not understand theirs. Already you are an outsider. Already you are vulnerable. The weight of the Nile world. The Nile glimmers in the distance, wide and calm, carrying boats with triangular sails of woven cloth. Farmers guide oxen through the muddy banks, preparing to sow barley and wheat. This river is everything to them: food, water, transport, and survival. Without it, there is only desert and death. But you notice something troubling. The people are wary, watching the waters carefully. The Nile floods every year, and whether it floods too much or too little can decide if the entire kingdom thrives or starves. You realize you are standing in a society completely dependent on nature's mood swings. You, who have supermarkets and clean tap water at home, suddenly feel the fragility of life here. One bad season, and thousands could die. Could you last through even one harvest cycle like this? Clothing, customs, and the alien feeling. The heat forces you to peel off your modern jacket. The locals wear simple linen, cool and airy, perfectly adapted to the climate. But you? Your clothes trap the heat, suffocating you. Already your skin burns, your throat aches for water, and then comes the smell. Sweat, smoke, dung, and fish all mixed in the air. Ancient Egypt is no sterile museum exhibit. It is alive, pungent, overwhelming. People are not offended by it. They are used to it. You, however, choke on every breath, your stomach turning. A group of men pass by carrying baskets of fish from the Nile. Their muscles ripple from constant labor, and they eye you with suspicion. To them, you are strange, weak, perhaps even cursed. You realize in a single glance that this is a world where only the strong and adapted survive. Hunger strikes. You are offered food, a rough, dark loaf of barley bread. It is coarse, filled with bits of husk, nothing like the soft bread you know. You chew and almost break a tooth. Alongside it, they hand you a mug of thick, cloudy beer, the staple drink of common Egyptians. It tastes sour, gritty, almost undrinkable. But here it is life. Your stomach rebels. Modern digestion is not built for this. Within minutes, nausea twists inside you. The bread is too heavy, the beer too strange. Already you are weakened, while the locals eat it without complaint. The staring eyes of the gods. As night approaches, you are led toward a small temple. The priests chant in deep voices, burning incense of frankincense and myrrh. Statues of falcon-headed Horus, jackal-headed Anubis, and the mighty sun god Ra tower over you. Their painted eyes seem to follow your every move. The people bow low, touching their heads to the ground. You hesitate, unsure what to do. In their world, not showing respect to the gods could mean suspicion or even punishment. Religion here is not personal belief. It is survival. Every ritual, every prayer, every sacrifice ties their lives to cosmic order, what they call Ma'at. To live outside of that order is dangerous, and so you bow too, awkwardly, feeling the heavy gaze of gods you don't believe in. Darkness falls. When the sun sets, the world turns black. There is no electricity, no street lights, no glow of phones or televisions. Only oil lamps flicker, casting long shadows against the walls. The stars above are bright, infinite, terrifying in their silence. The village goes quiet. People sleep early, huddled in small rooms guarded against snakes, scorpions, and thieves. You lie on a reed mat, restless. The air is hot, buzzing with insects. In the distance you hear the Nile's slow current and the occasional growl of something wild. Fear creeps in. You are alone, weak, in a world that does not understand you. A single cut could get infected and kill you. A single misunderstanding could make you an enemy. You realize with a sinking heart that you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. Why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt? The first morning in ancient Egypt is a trial by fire. You wake to the sound of roosters crowing and oxen snorting, their handlers shouting in a language you barely comprehend. The air is already warm, carrying the dusty smell of earth and smoke. By the time you sit up on the reed mat where you slept, sweat is trickling down your neck, and it is not even noon. A farmer laughs when he sees you wipe your brow. For him, this is nothing unusual. For you, the day has barely begun, and already your body screams for water. The merciless Egyptian sky. By mid-morning, the sun is a hammer. It blazes above you without pity, bleaching the mud brick walls until they glow, cracking the earth until fine dust lifts with every step. There are no sunglasses, no shaded porches, no bottled drinks chilled with ice. The villagers cover their heads with linen cloths. They smear themselves with oils made from castor or moringa seeds, not for beauty, but to protect their skin from the burning air. Their bodies are lean, hardened from daily labor, built for endurance. Your skin, however, is already red and stinging. You realize sunscreen doesn't exist here. One more hour under this sun and you will blister like an overcooked fish. Water is life and death. You stagger toward the Nile, desperate for a drink. The sight of that shimmering water is salvation, until you get close. People wash their clothes here. Donkeys splash and drink. Children bathe. Fishermen gut their catch, tossing guts back into the current. You scoop water into your hands, but an older woman slaps your wrist sharply. She scolds you in fast, sharp words. A young boy translates haltingly, "Not safe. Must boil." Boil? You have no fire, no pot, no means. You are trapped between thirst and sickness. Egyptians can drink the Nile's water, their stomachs hardened from birth. But you? One gulp and you risk dysentery, parasites, or worse. The beer they drink suddenly makes sense. Cloudy and bitter, it's safer than untreated river water. You choke it down, the sour taste clinging to your tongue. The farmers grin, amused at your discomfort. To them, you're soft. To you, survival feels like a cruel test. Labor under the sun. By midday, you are dragged into the fields. Everyone must work. Idleness is suspicious. The overseer, a tall man with a whip coiled at his belt, points at a basket of tools and gestures for you to follow the farmers. You take a wooden hoe and try to mimic their movements, breaking the soil, driving furrows, guiding oxen through the mud. But within minutes, your arms ache. Your shirt clings, soaked with sweat. The hot earth reflects the sun upward, roasting you from both sides. The farmers work silently, rhythmically. Their bodies glisten but never falter. They laugh at your stumbling. The overseer frowns. Here, weakness is dangerous. Too much failure, and you could be beaten, or worse, cast out. Your vision blurs. Your lips crack. You think of air conditioning, cold water from a fridge, a short rest in the shade of a fan. None of those exist here. The burn of the desert. Later, you are sent with 2 men toward the desert's edge to gather stone and sand for building repairs. The moment you leave the Nile's greenery, the land changes. The world becomes a furnace. Heat shimmers off the dunes, distorting the horizon. The sand sticks in your throat, in your eyes, under your nails. Every step is heavier than the last. The Egyptians walk steadily, balancing baskets on their shoulders. You stumble, dizzy. The desert is beautiful in its vastness, but it is also merciless. You understand instantly why so many feared to travel far without caravans. Alone in this wilderness, death would come within hours. Your lips split, bleeding. Your tongue feels like leather. The sun beats down as if Ra himself, the sun god, is testing your soul. The price of ignorance. Back in the village, you collapse under a palm tree. The shade is thin, but to you it feels like heaven. Someone pours a small jug of water into your hands. Boiled, cooled, precious. You gulp greedily, but then the laughter starts. To them, your collapse is amusing. How could someone so frail survive even a week here? Even the children run in the sun without complaint. You notice the scars on their shoulders, the hardened skin of their hands, the resilience of their bodies. Egypt has shaped them into survivors. You, on the other hand, feel like a fragile intruder. Evening, but no relief. When the sun finally sets, you expect relief. But the heat lingers, trapped in the mud walls, radiating back into the air. Sweat continues to drip as you lie awake. The insects swarm, biting at your arms and neck. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear. You remember reading that malaria existed here, carried by the very creatures now feasting on your blood. Your skin burns from sun exposure, your lips are swollen from thirst, your stomach churns from beer and bad bread. And tomorrow the sun will rise again, just as merciless. The lesson of the day. You realize now, this world belongs to the sun. The Egyptians worship Ra for a reason. He is not just a god, he is survival itself. Everything in this land bends to his power. And you are a creature of shade, comfort, and bottled conveniences. Here, you would not last a single summer, perhaps not even a single week. Food of the pharaohs. Why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. The day begins with hunger gnawing at your belly. Yesterday's bread and sour beer still sit heavy in your gut, but the work in the fields and the endless heat have burned through your energy. In modern life, you're used to variety. Breakfast cereal, fruit, coffee, perhaps eggs and toast. Here, in ancient Egypt, food is not about pleasure, it is about survival. The breakfast of the Nile. The first meal offered is bread. Always bread. Dark, dense, and rough with bits of husk still inside. Made mostly from emmer wheat or barley, it is the core of the Egyptian diet. The women pound the grains with heavy stones, mix them with water, then bake the dough inside clay ovens. The smell is earthy, warm, and inviting, but the reality is hard on the teeth. When you bite into it, you nearly crack a molar. Tiny grains of sand, ground in with the flour, scratch at your gums. It tastes coarse and bitter, far from the soft loaves of your world. Egyptians eat this every day of their lives, and their teeth, worn down, cracked, often infected, prove the cost. You chew slowly, wincing. The villagers laugh softly. To them it is normal. To you, it is punishment. Alongside the bread is a mug of beer, cloudy and thick, almost like porridge. It is sweet but sour, fermented from barley. For Egyptians, it is not just a drink, it is hydration, calories, and even medicine. Children drink it, women drink it, laborers gulp it by the gallon. But your tongue curls at the taste, and your stomach churns with every sip. A glimpse of luxury. Later in the day, you see what the wealthier Egyptians eat. A scribe from the temple passes through the village, carried in a small cart, his linen robe spotless, his perfume strong. His servants bring food for him, figs, dates, honey, fish roasted over fire. and even a small portion of beef. Your mouth waters at the sight. These are flavors closer to what you crave: sweet, rich, satisfying. But these luxuries are reserved for the upper class: priests, nobles, scribes, and of course the pharaoh. The farmer beside you shrugs at your longing gaze. He has likely never tasted honey in his life. Fishing the Nile. In the afternoon, the men take you to the river. With nets, hooks, and harpoons, they haul fish from the Nile's slow waters. Tilapia, catfish, perch, glimmering, wriggling, fresh from the current. The catch is salted, dried in the sun, or roasted over open flames. The smell makes your stomach growl. When they hand you a piece, you bite eagerly, only to cough as you choke on tiny bones. Egyptians are used to this, picking fish apart with skilled fingers. You, clumsy and desperate, nearly swallow one whole. By the time you manage to chew a small mouthful, the others are already laughing again. Survival here is not just about food. It is about knowing how to eat it. The flavor of spices, or the lack your modern tongue, is used to bold flavors: pepper, chili, salt in abundance. Here, flavor is simple: onions, garlic, coriander, cumin. These are the common seasonings. Meat is rare, spices from faraway lands even rarer. The stew you are given at sunset is made of lentils and leeks. It is filling but bland. No salt crystals sparkle within it. Salt is precious, mined from desert lakes, worth more than you can imagine. You swallow spoonful after spoonful, the texture thick and heavy. It fills your belly, yes, but without pleasure. Eating here is not a joy, it is endurance. The Feast of the Pharaoh. Later that night, you catch sight of a celebration in the temple courtyard. Torches blaze. Musicians play harps and flutes. Dancers move with grace. The priests bring out trays of offerings for the gods and for themselves. There is roast goose, dripping with fat, its skin crackling. Bowls of honey cakes, dates stuffed with nuts, grapes imported from far away. The smell is intoxicating, but none of it is for you. You watch from the shadows, hungry in both body and spirit, realizing the vast gap between commoner and elite. In this world, food is not just survival, it is power. The hidden dangers of the diet. Even if you were rich, even if you could eat like a pharaoh, there are dangers. The bread grinds down teeth with sand, the fish bring parasites from the Nile. Meat spoils quickly in the heat, spreading sickness. Beer carries bacteria that locals can handle, but your body cannot. Even fresh vegetables can poison if washed in contaminated water. Egyptians survive because they are born into this world shaped by it. You, dropped from the modern age, are too soft, too unprepared. Every bite carries risk. Every meal could make you weaker instead of stronger. Hunger in the night. When you return to your mat under the palm roof, your belly aches. You are not starving, but you are unsatisfied. Your tongue craves sweetness, variety, comfort. Your body rejects the heaviness of coarse bread and sour beer. The children around you sleep peacefully, full from the same meal that leaves you restless. They will wake at dawn, ready to eat the same food again. You, however, know that your body will rebel sooner or later. And in this world, hunger is not forgiven. Hunger is death. Lesson of the day. You roll onto your back, staring up at the dark ceiling. The temple feast's smells still haunt your nose. You realize that food here is more than just sustenance. It is a reflection of your place in society. As a commoner, you would eat to survive, not to enjoy. As a noble, you would eat luxuriously, but always with the risk of illness. And as a stranger, an outsider, you would never truly belong at any table. Modern stomachs are spoiled by convenience. In ancient Egypt, every bite is a struggle, a compromise with the land and the Nile. And you? You are not ready for that struggle. Disease medicine. Why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. A scratch that turns deadly. It begins with something small. While helping carry baskets of reeds from the Nile, you nick your hand on a sharp edge. Just a thin cut, barely bleeding. In your world, you would wash it with clean water, apply antiseptic, maybe cover it with a bandage. It would heal in a day or two. But here, in ancient Egypt, there is no antiseptic, no soap, no bandages sealed in sterile plastic. The wound quickly fills with dirt, sweat, and sand. By evening, the skin around the cut is red, hot, and throbbing. Infection has already begun. The fragile body, in a harsh world illness in ancient Egypt, is everywhere. You see it now that you notice. Children with swollen bellies from parasites. Farmers coughing deep, wet coughs from years of dust and smoke. Elderly men limping from untreated broken bones. Women with abscesses on their teeth, faces twisted in pain. Life expectancy here is short. Most people do not live beyond 35. Many children die before they even reach 10. You realize that your cut is not just a cut. It could be your death sentence. Summoned to the doctor. The villagers notice your swollen hand and lead you to a healer. He is not a doctor as you know the word, but a priest-physician. His small chamber smells of burning herbs and bitter oils. Papyrus scrolls lie rolled in jars filled with incantations and recipes for treatments. He examines your hand and nods gravely. He mutters words that sound half like prayer, half like command. Then he begins. Ancient remedies first, he pours honey into the wound. Sticky, golden, thick. It burns at first, but then cools. You know, faintly, that honey has antibacterial properties. Somehow they discovered this thousands of years before modern science. Next, he grinds moldy bread into a paste and presses it onto your cut. The smell is sour, rancid. It makes you gag. Yet, unknown to him, the mold contains penicillin-like properties. Perhaps it could help, or perhaps it will only add more filth. Finally, he ties a strip of linen around your hand, muttering a spell. I drive out the disease, I banish the evil, by the power of Horus and Isis. The people watching bow their heads. For them, healing is half medicine, half magic. The darkness of belief. But not all remedies are so harmless. You see jars filled with strange ingredients. Crocodile dung, ox blood, ground up insects. The healer insists that these drive out evil spirits. You pray he does not decide to use them on you. He blows incense smoke over your face. The room fills with the choking scent of myrrh. You cough, eyes watering. He touches your forehead and declares that your sickness is caused by a curse, perhaps the wrath of a neglected god. The villagers whisper nervously. Some step back from you, afraid that your illness could be contagious, or worse, supernatural. Night of fever. That night, the fever begins. Your body shakes, soaked with sweat. The cut on your hand throbs with fire. Dreams twist into nightmares of jackal-headed Anubis, waiting to weigh your heart against a feather. You hear whispers in the dark, voices speaking a language you cannot follow. In your world, antibiotics would save you. Here, survival depends on the Nile, the gods, and the strange mixtures of honey, herbs, and prayers. The limits of medicine. At dawn, the healer returns. He unwraps your bandage. The skin is swollen, pus leaking from the wound. His face tightens. He begins chanting again, smearing another layer of honey, this time mixed with crushed garlic. You notice the tools by his side. Bronze scalpels, sharp obsidian blades, hooks for pulling teeth. Crude instruments, dangerous without anesthesia or cleanliness. Surgery here is agony, often fatal. If your infection worsens, the only cure may be amputation, and that cure itself could kill you. The reality of ancient sickness. Your case is not unique. Sickness defines life here. Malaria lurks in the buzzing mosquitoes at night. Schistosomiasis, a parasite, waits in the Nile's water. Tuberculosis spreads in crowded homes. Tooth decay torments almost everyone. The Egyptians do what they can. Herbs, honey, prayers, spells. But medicine is as much guesswork as science. Sometimes the remedies work. Often they don't. And unlike your world, there are no hospitals, no emergency rooms, no second chances. A fever can kill. A cough can kill. A scratch can kill. Lesson of the day. By the time the fever passes, you are weak, shaking, but alive. Perhaps the honey saved you. Perhaps luck. Perhaps the gods. But one truth is clear. In ancient Egypt, disease is the invisible enemy. You can survive the sun, survive the food, even survive the labor. But your body, soft and unprepared, is no match for the invisible killers of this land. You wouldn't last a day without falling sick, and once sick, you may never rise again. The Nile's wrath. Why you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. The river of life. The Nile is Egypt's beating heart. Without it, there is only sand, heat, and death. When you first stood on its banks, it seemed calm and eternal, shimmering under the blazing sun, carrying fishermen's boats, nourishing green fields. It felt like a promise of safety. But the villagers tell you in hushed voices, the river gives, and the river takes. And now, you begin to see what they mean. The time of inundation. It is late summer. The people speak of Akhet, the season of flooding. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile swells with water from rains far to the south in the Ethiopian highlands. You wake one morning to a strange sound. Rushing, gurgling, swelling water. The calm river you knew has transformed into a furious beast. Its banks vanish under brown waves. Trees bend, reeds snap, huts tremble. The villagers cheer at first. The flood means fertile soil, crops for the year, bread for the kingdom. Without it, famine would come. But as the water rises higher and higher, their cheers falter. Too much water, and their homes will drown. Too little, and the fields will starve. You watch as entire plots of farmland disappear. The river, once friendly, is now terrifying. The fear of famine. The elders tell you of years past when the flood failed. The Nile shrank, the land cracked, and no barley sprouted. Those were years of hunger, when families boiled reeds and ate them, when children wasted away, when even priests went without bread. Other years, the flood raged too high, sweeping away cattle, drowning villages, leaving behind only rot and destruction. The pharaoh himself is judged by these waters. If the Nile fails, the people whisper that their ruler has lost the gods' favor. Rebellion brews, kingdoms tremble, all because of a river. Your modern eyes, their ancient belief. You see it scientifically. Rainfall far away, currents carrying silt, natural cycles. But to the Egyptians, this is divine. The Nile's flood is the tears of the goddess Isis or the gift of the god Hapi. Priests march along the banks, chanting prayers, offering loaves and jars of beer to the water. They promise the people that the gods will provide balance. You, standing there with modern knowledge, cannot change their world. To them, without faith, there is no survival. Your modern eyes, their ancient belief. You see it scientifically. Rainfall far away, currents carrying silt, natural cycles. But to the Egyptians, this is divine. The Nile's flood is the tears of the goddess Isis, or the gift of the god Hapi. Priests march along the banks, chanting prayers, offering loaves and jars of beer to the water. They promise the people that the gods will provide balance. You, standing there with modern knowledge, cannot change their world. To them, without faith there is no survival. The struggle to rebuild. When the waters finally begin to retreat, the land looks different. Mud, thick and black, covers everything. The farmers cheer again. This mud, the gift of the Nile, is richer than gold. Into it they throw seeds of barley and wheat. But for you, this world is chaos. Homes have been damaged, food stores ruined, livestock drowned. Mosquitoes breed in the standing pools, carrying fevers. The air stinks of wet rot. Even as life begins anew, you feel the fragility of it all. Your world has stability. Farms with irrigation, grocery stores, Backup systems. Here, everything depends on a river's mood. Hunger in the villages. For weeks, rations are scarce. Bread is smaller, beer thinner, fish harder to catch in muddy waters. You feel hunger gnaw at you again. The farmers are used to this cycle. They have stomachs and spirits hardened by generations of struggle. You, however, feel your body weaken quickly. The sun burns you. The food is never enough. The fear of sickness grows with every bite of Nile-drenched fish. Children still laugh, running barefoot in mud, splashing each other. Their joy amazes you. How can they smile when survival hangs by a thread? The Nile as a grave one. Evening, as the sun sinks blood red over the horizon, you see something float past in the current. A body, perhaps drowned in the flood, perhaps struck by sickness. The villagers do not panic. They bow their heads. The Nile both feeds and buries them. A chill runs through you. You think of how fragile life is here, how one season of bad water could doom everyone. Lesson of the day. You came to Egypt thinking of pyramids and pharaohs, of gold and glory. But the truth is this: Egypt is not built by kings. It is built by a river. The Nile is mother and destroyer, blessing and curse. Every loaf of bread, every sip of beer, every life in this land depends on its mercy. And you who are used to endless supermarkets and bottled water, would not last a single season. The river would starve you, drown you, or carry you away before you ever understood how to live by its laws. You wake before dawn to the sound of a whip cracking in the distance. The desert air is still cool, but it won't stay that way for long. Someone shoves a rough piece of bread into your hand, hard, chewy, and coarse with sand. Eat quickly, a man grumbles. The overseer is waiting. This is your new reality. You are a farmer in ancient Egypt, the backbone of the kingdom, yet treated like the lowest of workers. The endless Nile fields. The land stretches endlessly, divided into narrow strips along the Nile. Muddy soil clings to your feet as you wade into the flooded plots. The Nile's waters have receded just enough to leave behind thick black earth, rich and fertile, but incredibly heavy to till. The men around you carry simple wooden plows, tied to oxen that grunt and pull. The tools are primitive, far weaker than the steel equipment you're used to. Each step feels like you're dragging your body through glue. Your task: bend, dig, plant, repeat, over and over. No breaks except when the overseer allows it. If you slack, the whip stings across your back. Your hands blister within the first hour. Your lower back aches from constant bending. Sweat pours into your eyes as the rising sun scorches everything in sight. Bread and beer, the farmer's rations. By midday, the heat is unbearable. Your body begs for shade, but the overseer calls you to a meal. You're handed more coarse bread, made from emmer wheat, mixed with grit from grinding stones. Every bite feels like chewing sandpaper. Then comes the beer. Not the golden, crisp drink you imagine, but a thick, porridge-like mixture, sour and heavy. The Egyptians drink it because water is unsafe, and it fills the stomach better than plain grain. You gag at first, but hunger forces you to swallow. Soon your head spins from the slight fermentation. Strangely, it helps dull the pain. The whip and the overseer. You glance at the man in charge. The overseer, standing tall with a long stick in hand. His voice carries across the fields like thunder. Work faster. The floods don't wait for lazy hands. The farmers whisper about him. Some say he's harsher than others, demanding impossible quotas. You notice the scars on your fellow workers' backs. This is not just farming. It's survival under a system that values crops more than lives. A young boy drops his basket of seeds. The overseer storms over, grabs him by the arm, and lashes him across the legs. The boy cries, but no one dares intervene. You want to protest, but an older farmer grips your wrist. His eyes warn, "Stay silent, or you'll be next." Pestilence and pain. As the day drags on, you notice the other enemies of the farmers. Insects. Clouds of flies buzz constantly around your face. Locusts threaten to devour the crops before they even sprout. Without modern pesticides, the farmers rely on prayers and crude traps. Your bare feet step on something sharp. You wince and pull back to find a thorn lodged deep in your soul. Blood drips into the mud. Infections here are deadly, yet the work doesn't stop. An old man spits on the wound, presses some crushed herbs, and ties a strip of linen around it. "Keep moving," he says flatly. There is no choice. To stop is to invite punishment or death. Songs of the Nile. By late afternoon, exhaustion takes over. Your muscles scream with every movement. To keep spirits alive, some workers begin singing. Strange melodic chants rise above the fields, songs praising the Nile, the gods, even the pharaoh who will never set foot here. For a moment, the rhythm of their voices makes the work almost bearable. You find yourself humming along, though you don't know the words. It feels like a reminder. Even in suffering, humans cling to hope. Sunset over the fields. As the sun sets, the sky bleeds into colors of gold and crimson. Finally, the overseer allows the workers to stop. Everyone collapses on the ground, too drained to speak. You stare at your hands, raw and blistered, covered in mud. Your back feels broken. You think about your modern life: air-conditioned offices, soft mattresses, clean food. Here, there is no comfort, only survival. And yet these farmers do this every single day of their lives. Not for luxury, not for wealth, but so the pharaoh, priests, and nobles can feast while they barely scrape by. You finally understand why Egyptians believed so deeply in the afterlife. This life was simply too harsh to endure without hope of something better beyond death. Closing thought. As you crawl onto a straw mat that night, the stars glitter above you like cold eyes. The pain in your body is unbearable, yet the knowledge cuts deeper. You wouldn't last a single harvest season in ancient Egypt. But these farmers did, for generations. You thought farm life in Egypt was hard. Endless days under the whip of an overseer, breaking your back just to grow barley and wheat. But today, something worse awaits you. A group of soldiers drags you from the fields and marches you toward the desert cliffs. In the distance, enormous stone pyramids rise from the sand, their smooth surfaces gleaming like suns in the morning light. You realize with a sinking feeling in your stomach, you have been recruited as a builder of monuments. At first, you imagine this is an honor. After all, aren't the pyramids the most famous symbol of ancient Egypt? A chance to carve your name in history? But the fantasy fades quickly. For most Egyptians, being sent to work on a massive construction project meant years of suffering, sweat, broken bones, and often an early death. The labor force. The Egyptians didn't exactly use slaves to build their great pyramids. Instead, they relied on peasants and workers forced into corvée labor, a kind of mandatory service. Farmers like you were dragged from the fields during the off-season of the Nile flood and sent to construction sites. You are not alone. Hundreds of men trudge beside you, carrying crude tools, chisels, hammers, ropes, and baskets. The air is dry, and the wind whips dust into your eyes. When you arrive, the sight is overwhelming. A pyramid under construction looks nothing like the smooth triangle we see today. It's a chaotic mountain of stone, surrounded by scaffolding, ramps, and shouting overseers. Men haul massive limestone blocks, each weighing tons, using nothing but ropes, sledges, and sheer muscle. The noise of chisels and the groans of laborers echo across the desert. Backbreaking work. You are immediately given a task: dragging blocks from the quarry to the pyramid's base. Teams of 20 men pull a single stone on a wooden sled, chanting together to keep rhythm. Your shoulders ache as the rope digs into your skin. Sweat pours down your face and your lungs burn from the dust. You trip once and the overseer lashes your back with a whip. "No rest. The pharaoh commands it," he shouts. The Egyptians believe that building a monument for the pharaoh is not just construction, it is a holy duty. Every block is meant to help the ruler's soul ascend to the afterlife. But for you, there is no spirituality here, only pain, exhaustion, and fear of punishment. Living conditions. At night, you are herded into a workers' village near the construction site. The huts are small and crowded, filled with the smell of sweat, straw, and illness. Dinner is coarse bread and a mug of beer, the only relief after a day of torment. Your body aches so badly you can barely chew. Still, you notice that Egyptians were careful to keep their workers alive. After all, a dead worker cannot move stone. Healers roam the camp, using honey to treat wounds, and priests mutter prayers over those who fall ill. But recovery is slow. Many die anyway, from crushed limbs, exhaustion, or infections that fester in the heat. Engineering marvels. Despite the misery, you can't help but marvel at the scale of what you are part of. You see teams using wooden rollers and sleds to move the stones, pouring water on the sand to make the sleds slide more easily. Ramps snake up the side of the pyramid, allowing the blocks to be dragged higher and higher. Watching the process is astonishing, but it doesn't ease the agony of your own work. The pharaoh's overseers walk among the workers, shouting commands. Their whips crack, their eyes are sharp. They carry tall staffs, symbols of power. One wrong move, and you'll feel the sting across your back. At Ethionolibri one morning, you witness a horrifying scene. A block slips from a sled and crashes onto a worker's leg. His screams fill the desert. The overseer doesn't stop the work. The injured man is dragged away, and the rest of the team is forced to keep hauling the stone as if nothing happened. You realize how little your life is worth here. To the pharaoh, you are just another tool. Pride and fear. And yet, even in this misery, some workers take pride in their labor. They carve graffiti into the stones, leaving behind names of their gangs, the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaura. For them, this is more than survival. It's a chance to serve something greater. You, however, are too exhausted to feel pride. All you want is to go home. At night, you look up at the stars glittering over the desert. The pyramid looms against the sky, unfinished, yet already towering. You wonder, will it stand for thousands of years after you're gone? Will anyone remember the blood and sweat poured into each block? Why you wouldn't last. For a modern person like you, surviving as a pyramid builder would be nearly impossible. No protective gear, no modern medicine, no labor rights, just endless hauling, dragging, lifting, and pain under the burning Egyptian sun. Your body, unused to such punishment, would give out in days, maybe weeks. As you collapse onto the straw mat in your hut, your muscles screaming, you finally understand why so many died young in ancient Egypt. Building monuments may have made pharaohs immortal, but it turned ordinary men into forgotten sacrifices of stone. The sun beats down upon your head as you stagger through the sandy lanes of an Egyptian town. The day is just beginning, yet already the people around you are whispering prayers. Their voices rise toward the heavens with a kind of trembling reverence. To the Egyptians, the divine is not distant or abstract. It is everywhere, in the rising sun, the rushing Nile, the hum of insects in the fields, even in the breath you are now struggling to take. For you, raised in a world of science and reason, it feels like entering a permanent temple where every moment of life is overshadowed by gods. And to the Egyptians, fear of these gods is not a choice. It is survival. The omnipresence of the divine. The first shock comes when you see how many gods there are. You thought there might be one or two, but here the pantheon is endless. Ra, the blazing sun god, is worshipped with every sunrise. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide of the dead, watches funerals with his black snout raised toward the stars. Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, appears in charms and amulets that hang from women's necks. Osiris, ruler of the underworld, is feared in hushed tones when people speak of judgment after death. The city walls are painted with divine imagery. On the market doors you see carvings of Horus, the falcon god, painted in bright blue and red. Every shopkeeper bows before entering, muttering a blessing so they won't bring bad luck on their business. Even farmers plowing the fields pause to offer bread and beer to the Nile, thanking Hapi, god of the river, for the floods that make crops possible. For the Egyptians, there is no such thing as ordinary life. Everything is tied to the divine, and ignoring the gods could invite catastrophe. The temple rituals. You follow the crowd to a great temple. Towering pylons rise above you, covered in carved hieroglyphs glowing in the sun. The smell of incense hangs heavy in the air. Inside, the atmosphere shifts to one of awe and dread. Only priests may approach the inner sanctum where the god statue resides. Ordinary people like you must remain outside, waiting for blessings from afar. The rituals are unlike anything you've ever seen. Priests in white linen robes purify themselves with water from sacred pools. They shave their heads to remain ritually clean. As they walk past, people kneel in silence, too fearful to look them in the eye. Suddenly, drums thunder. Musicians play harps and sistrums, creating a hypnotic rhythm that echoes across the stone walls. The priests chant hymns to Ra, their voices vibrating like the very heartbeat of Egypt. Then, with solemn gestures, they bring offerings. Baskets of bread, jars of wine, oils, gold, and even live animals. You watch as a calf is sacrificed, its blood draining onto the altar. The crowd gasps, and the priest declares the god satisfied. For the Egyptians, this ritual is not symbolic. It is real. They believe that if Ra is not fed, if Anubis is not honored, the sun might not rise, or the dead might rise in anger, or the Nile might fail to flood. You suddenly realize their entire survival depends not on reason or nature, but on keeping these gods appeased, fear of judgment. Later, an old man explains to you the terrifying belief that grips every Egyptian heart, the weighing of the soul. When someone dies, their heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart is lighter, the person may enter the eternal paradise known as the Field of Reeds. If it is heavier, the monstrous crocodile-headed Ammit devours it, and the soul ceases to exist. The thought chills you. These people live their whole lives fearing that one wrong action, a lie, a theft, a betrayal, could doom them for eternity. No wonder they pray constantly. No wonder their lives are guided by ritual. Every choice is a matter of cosmic life or death. You see women carrying amulets of the Eye of Horus around their necks, believing it will protect them in the afterlife. Children are taught hymns so their souls can recite them before Osiris in judgment. Farmers whisper prayers while planting seeds, believing even small acts could sway the god's judgment. You realize that in this world, fear of divine punishment is not an occasional thought. It is a constant, suffocating presence. The terror of omens. At night, as the moon rises, you hear whispers of omens. A cat meows strangely, a bad sign. A bird flies across the temple at the wrong time, an ill omen. The Egyptians rush to their priests, begging for charms and spells to ward off disaster. Magic and religion are deeply intertwined. Papyrus scrolls with protective spells are sold at high prices. Women wear amulets in childbirth. Men tie scarabs to their arms for luck in battle. You watch as a family burns incense and murmurs incantations to drive away evil spirits from their home. One night, lightning cracks across the desert sky. The people fall to their knees, crying out that Ra is angry. Priests rush to perform late-night rituals, chanting into the darkness, begging the gods to forgive them. For you, it is frightening. These people live with a kind of paranoia, where every natural event carries divine meaning. A bad harvest, a stillborn child, a sudden storm, all of it is punishment from the gods. The weight of fear. By the end of the day, you feel exhausted, not from labor, but from the heavy weight of constant fear. Imagine living in a world where every act, eating, farming, sleeping, even breathing, must be aligned with the will of unseen powers. A world where one wrong step could bring the wrath of gods who are not forgiving, but vengeful and unpredictable. You think of your modern life where a storm is just weather, a sickness is just biology. Here, there is no such comfort. Everything is a sign, and every sign demands obedience. The Egyptians are not only builders of monuments and farmers of the Nile, they are prisoners of their gods. And now, so are you. You are beginning to notice that life in ancient Egypt is not only about the heat, hard labor, or hunger. It's about fear. Fear of gods, fear of disease, and most of all, fear of the law. For in this world, justice is not like the modern courts you know. It is raw, swift, and brutal. A whisper of suspicion. The morning begins quietly in the village. Farmers gather with baskets of barley. Women carry jugs of water from the Nile. Children chase goats through the dusty streets. Then, suddenly, you hear shouts. A man has been accused of stealing grain from the temple storehouse. The accusation alone is enough to gather a crowd. Faces turn sharp, suspicious. There are no lawyers here, no detectives carefully gathering fingerprints. The overseer simply drags the accused by his collar, his cries lost beneath the angry murmurs of the villagers. You are pushed into the crowd, watching with uneasy fascination. The court of the vizier. Later that day, you are allowed to witness the trial, not in a grand marble courtroom, but in a mud brick hall shaded by palm fronds. At the center sits the vizier, the pharaoh's right hand and the highest judge in the land. He is dressed in fine white linen, with a golden amulet of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, hanging from his chest. There is no jury, no long debate. Witnesses speak briefly, accusing the man of sneaking into the granary at night. The accused pleads his innocence, begging for mercy, but the vizier listens in silence. His eyes are sharp, trained to detect lies. On the wall behind him is painted the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth. The message is clear. Justice must be swift, balanced, and merciless. The punishments of Egypt. The vizier raises his hand. The verdict, guilty. You brace yourself, expecting imprisonment. But in Egypt, there are no long prison terms. Instead, punishment is physical and immediate. For theft, the penalty is 100 lashes across the back with a reed whip. The crowd drags the man to the ground and soldiers begin striking. His cries echo, blood mixing with the dust. And that is the milder sentence. For worse crimes, like tomb robbery, the punishment is execution. Sometimes by burning, sometimes by drowning in the Nile. For treason against the pharaoh, entire families can be wiped out. Their names erased from monuments as if they had never lived. Even smaller offenses carry weight. Cheating in the marketplace? You could lose a hand. Speaking blasphemy against a god? You could have your tongue cut out. The laws are meant not just to punish but to terrify everyone into obedience. You feel your stomach churn. One careless mistake here, and you could be next. Justice for the powerful. But as days pass, you realize something more unsettling. The laws are not equal. When a noble's son is caught drunk and insulting a priest, the punishment is a quiet scolding. When a farmer forgets his share of grain tax, the punishment is lashes. For commoners, justice is harsh and public, a spectacle meant to maintain order. For the elite, justice is flexible, often softened with bribes or family connections. You see the truth. In Egypt, Ma'at may represent balance and fairness, but reality bends for those with power. Fear in daily life. Walking through the market, you notice how cautious everyone is. Merchants use weights and scales openly, terrified of being accused of cheating. Scribes carefully tally numbers, knowing a mistake could be seen as fraud. Even children are taught early, never lie, never steal, never disrespect the gods, because punishment is severe and second chances are rare. A woman drops a jar of beer in the street and for a moment everyone freezes, watching her carefully, as if even an accident might be judged as neglect or theft. She sighs with relief when a guard waves her away, uninterested. Every day feels like walking on a knife's edge. The philosophy of Ma'at. One evening, you sit beside a priest who explains it more gently. We do not punish for cruelty, he says, but for balance. The world is fragile. The Nile floods, the desert threatens, and chaos always waits. If people lie, cheat, or steal, The balance breaks, and chaos returns. We protect Ma'at by being strict. You nod slowly. To them, punishment is not cruelty, but survival. Yet to you, it feels unbearable, like living under a constant shadow of fear. What if you were accused? A chilling thought crosses your mind. What if you were accused? You don't know the customs well, the language is still difficult, and your clothing marks you as different. A child could point at you and shout "thief," and the guards would drag you away without hesitation. There would be no lawyer, no DNA test, no camera footage to prove your innocence. Only the vizier's sharp gaze and the whispers of the crowd. You shiver at the thought. Closing reflection. As night falls, you lie awake, the sound of the whip still ringing in your ears. You understand now why people in this land obey so carefully, why they bow to authority and gods alike. Life here is already fragile. To break the law is to risk not only punishment, but erasure. And you realize something with a sinking heart. You would not last a day in ancient Egypt, because even a single mistake could cost you your life. The sun had barely begun to rise when you were summoned by a group of soldiers with shaved heads and bronze-tipped spears. Their voices carried authority that allowed no argument. You tried to protest, to ask why they had chosen you, but your words were drowned in the clamor of the morning streets. You were escorted away from the crowded marketplace, past mud brick homes and small temples, until the silhouette of the pharaoh's palace came into view. It was unlike anything you had seen in Egypt so far. While the homes of common people were simple, flat-roofed, plain, made from sun-dried mud, the palace radiated power. Tall, whitewashed walls gleamed in the sunlight. Painted murals of gods and lotus flowers adorned the entrances. Obelisks stood guard like eternal spears, and colossal statues of falcon-headed Horus glared down upon you. Walking inside was like stepping into another world. The floors were polished smooth, reflecting the flicker of oil lamps. The smell of incense hung heavy in the air. Myrrh, frankincense, and lotus oil. Servants hurried silently through the corridors, carrying trays of bread, bowls of figs, and jars of beer. The difference between this life and the one you had witnessed among farmers was staggering. Here, every gesture was deliberate, every corner designed to remind visitors of divine power. A court official in linen robes motioned for you to stay silent. He led you into a massive hall where rows of columns stretched toward the ceiling, each painted with images of palm trees and marsh reeds. The sheer scale made you feel like an insect crawling in a god's temple. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised platform, sat the pharaoh. He wore a headdress of gold and blue, its cobra-shaped ornament seeming almost alive as it glinted in the torchlight. Around his neck hung wide collars of turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. His skin was painted with oils, his eyes lined with kohl so dark they seemed to pierce directly into your soul. No one in the hall dared breathe without his permission. You quickly realized the pharaoh was more than just a king. To his people, he was a god incarnate, the living Horus on earth, the mediator between men and the divine. Every gesture he made was mirrored by the courtiers, as though his movements carried cosmic weight. Nearby, dancers moved gracefully, their anklets jingling faintly as they spun to the sound of harps and drums. Perfumed maidens waved fans of ostrich feathers to cool their divine master. A golden throne decorated with lions and falcons shimmered in the light, while soldiers stood stiff at every corner of the chamber. The pharaoh spoke, though not to you. His words were directed to priests and generals kneeling below him, reporting on harvests, the progress of temple construction, and possible threats from neighboring Nubians. You listened, your heart pounding. You had stumbled into the beating heart of Egypt's power. But even here, life was not without danger. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and you could easily be accused of insulting the pharaoh. In Egypt, blasphemy against the king was blasphemy against the gods themselves. The punishment could be swift and brutal: beatings, mutilation, or even death. Or even, as the pharaoh dismissed his council, servants hurried forward with food. You watched in awe as dishes were laid out: roasted duck stuffed with herbs, freshly baked bread still warm, honey cakes glistening with syrup, bowls of dates and figs, and jars of wine imported from far-off lands. The sheer abundance was overwhelming. You thought of the farmer who had once given you a piece of coarse barley bread, his only meal for the day. Here, food was not survival, it was a symbol of divine privilege. But luxury had its dangers too. Court life was filled with intrigue. Whispers floated through the corridors like poison. Behind the walls, concubines and queens battled for influence. Viziers plotted their rise. Generals hoped to be favored with gold or land. To live in the palace was to walk on the edge of a blade, comfort surrounded by constant suspicion. As you observed, one official leaned too close while delivering his report. The pharaoh's expression tightened. The man was dragged away instantly, protesting his loyalty, his cries echoing until they vanished in the depths of the palace. You realized then how fragile life was, even here in luxury. Later you were guided into the palace gardens. The air was cooler, shaded by sycamore and date palms. Pools filled with lotus blossoms shimmered like mirrors. Exotic birds fluttered in the branches. For a moment, you forgot the suffocating tension of the throne room. It was peaceful, almost otherworldly. Yet even in this paradise, guards watched from every corner, and priests whispered prayers to keep evil spirits at bay. The pharaoh's world was not only one of gold and perfume, it was also a cage built on power, fear, and divine duty. You realized then that while the common people struggled with hunger, toil, and disease, the pharaoh bore a different kind of burden. To rule Egypt meant being worshipped like a god, but also being trapped by expectations no human could truly fulfill. As night fell, you were escorted out of the palace. Looking back, the walls glowed with torchlight, the banners of Horus and Ra swaying in the evening breeze. You felt a shiver run down your spine. The palace was beautiful, magnificent, almost heavenly. But it was also a place where one wrong breath could end your life. For a modern visitor like you, it wasn't just the heat or the hunger of Egypt that made survival impossible. Even in the glittering halls of power, danger was always waiting. You walked away, knowing the pharaoh's world was no less deadly than the farmer's field. If there is one idea that binds every single Egyptian soul together, it is this: death is not the end. To them, death is merely a gateway, and beyond that gateway lies either eternal bliss or eternal despair. You learn this not in words, but in the thick smell of incense that clings to your nostrils as you are dragged inside a place you never thought you'd see. The house of embalming. The mummification chamber. The room is dim, lit only by oil lamps whose flames flicker against painted walls of gods guiding souls into the afterlife. The air is thick, not just with smoke, but with the sharp scent of natron, a natural salt piled in clay jars. The floor beneath your bare feet is cool stone, yet warm liquid runs across it. It takes you a moment to realize it's blood. Before you lies a body, once someone's father, brother, or perhaps soldier. Now he is naked, lifeless, and being prepared to face eternity. The embalmers are calm, their hands steady. To them, this is not gruesome work, but sacred duty. One priest whispers words to Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, as another makes the first incision in the corpse's side. You flinch as the priest's bronze blade slips into the skin, pulling free intestines and organs, placing them into shining jars carved with the heads of animals: hawks, baboons, jackals, cobras. The canopic jars you remember from history books, but reading about it and watching it are two very different things. The brain is hooked out through the nose with a long, curved tool. The sight makes your stomach twist, but the embalmers work with steady grace, as if each movement is rehearsed. Finally, the hollow body is washed with palm wine, stuffed with resin-soaked cloth, then buried in natron to dry. 40 days you overhear it will take. 40 days before this man's skin becomes tight and leathery, his body light and preserved. You can't help but whisper to yourself, all this trouble for death. But an old priest beside you chuckles. No, stranger. All this trouble for life. For the true life. the weighing of the heart. That night, still shaken, you ask a villager what the priest meant. The man is toothless, his hands calloused from farming, but his eyes light up when he speaks of the soul. When you die, your ka, your spirit, travels to Osiris, he explains, pointing at the starry sky. There, before the gods, your heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth. You picture it, your beating heart, placed on one side of a great golden scale, a single white feather on the other. If your heart is heavy with sin, lies, cruelty, greed, it drags down, and the monster Amit devours it. No second chance. Your soul is gone forever. But if it balances, light and pure, you pass into the field of reeds. A paradise where the Nile flows endlessly, crops grow tall, and family waits forever. Suddenly the jars, the wrappings, the long rituals, they all make sense. To Egyptians, the body was not just flesh. It was a vessel the soul would one day need again. Funeral rites. Soon, you are brought to witness a full funeral. The family wails loudly, tearing their linen garments, smearing ash on their faces. To you, it looks theatrical, but to them, grief must be shouted so the dead hear it. Priests chant hymns while musicians play reed flutes and drums. A young girl shakes a rattle called a sistrum, the sound meant to ward off evil spirits. The mummy, wrapped tightly in shining linen painted with charms, is laid inside a carved wooden coffin. Hieroglyphs line the surface, prayers for protection. You glimpse a painted eye staring out at you, the Eye of Horus, a symbol meant to watch over the soul forever. The coffin is slid into a stone sarcophagus. Before it is sealed, the eldest son bends close, touching his lips to a carved tool, then to the mummy's mouth. You learn this is the opening of the mouth ceremony, believed to restore breath and speech in the afterlife. Every step of this feels alien yet strangely beautiful. Egyptians fear death, yes, but they also prepare for it better than any people you've ever known. The cost of immortality. But such rituals are not for everyone. You learn quickly that mummification is expensive, reserved mostly for nobles, priests, and the wealthy. Common farmers are often buried in shallow desert graves, their bodies naturally dried by heat and sand. Some families can only afford a simple shroud, a prayer, and nothing more. Death in Egypt is equal only in inevitability, not in treatment. Rich or poor, however, all cling to the same hope, that their name will be remembered. For to be forgotten is the worst death of all. Your own fear. That night, as you lay under the stars, you think of your own world. Modern medicine, hospitals, coffins, cremations, efficient, clean, emotionless by comparison. But here, death is not hidden. It is raw, loud, sacred, terrifying. You find yourself wondering, if you were to die here, would you stand a chance before the scale of Ma'at? Would your heart weigh heavier than a feather? The thought keeps you awake long after the torches burn out. When you wake up on this particular morning, the village is buzzing with excitement. The Nile has flooded just enough to bring fertile soil, and the harvest has been good. That means only one thing, the great market day. The Egyptians called it the souk, and it was the beating heart of every town. To you, a modern traveler, it feels like stepping into a living, breathing festival. But soon, the overwhelming chaos of ancient trade makes you realize you don't belong here. The first sight. As you approach the market, the sound hits you first. A roar of voices, animals, laughter, and haggling fills the air. Donkeys bray, goats bleat, merchants shout their prices at the top of their lungs. Dust rises into the heat and you can smell everything at once. Fresh bread baking in clay ovens, roasted fish, dates and honey, sweat, animal dung, and perfume made of lotus and myrrh. The Nile is nearby, and many stalls are nothing more than wooden tables set under woven reed shades. Some sellers simply spread their goods out on mats. Yet there's a richness here, piles of figs, onions, garlic, lentils, and dried fish, copper tools glinting in the sun, baskets overflowing with wheat, necklaces of turquoise, lapis lazuli, and faience beads that sparkle like jewels. You can't stop staring, but staring is dangerous. A merchant yells at you in Egyptian, assuming you're a thief or rival. People don't wander the market wide-eyed when they come to buy, sell, or trade. You stand out and the crowd presses you forward whether you want to move or not. Trading without coins. To your surprise, no one is handing over shiny coins. Instead, goods are exchanged in barter or with measured amounts of grain. Grain was currency in ancient Egypt, stored in state granaries and valued like money. A handful of wheat could buy a jug of beer. A sack could buy a goat. A man tries to offer you a basket of onions in exchange for your strange belt, which he mistakes for something valuable. You hesitate, clutching your clothing tighter, realizing that even your most ordinary modern items would seem exotic here. But refusing a trade rudely can cause trouble, and soon the man's voice rises, drawing attention. You hurry away, heart racing. The marketplace is not a place for dreamers. It is a place for hustlers, bargainers, and the quick-tongued. Without knowing the system, you're at a disadvantage. The slave market. Turning a corner, you stumble into a darker section of the souk. Here the air feels heavier, quieter, and grim. Men and women stand in lines, their wrists bound with rope. They are slaves, captured in war or sold into servitude. Wealthy Egyptians walk among them, inspecting teeth, muscles, and health the way modern buyers might look at horses. You freeze, horrified. A boy barely 10 years old meets your gaze with empty eyes. His fate will be servitude in a noble household, or perhaps endless toil in the fields. To modern sensibilities, it's unbearable. But here, it is normal. Even some poor Egyptians will one day hope to buy a servant to make life easier. A guard notices your hesitation and scowls. You back away quickly, your stomach twisting. This isn't the history book version of Egypt with golden tombs and pretty hieroglyphs. This is survival, and it has teeth. Music, performance, and temptation. Not all of the marketplace is grim. In another area, musicians play harps and flutes, while dancers perform for small coins and scraps of food. Children laugh and chase each other through the crowds. Perfume sellers let you sniff lotus oil, and bakers tempt you with honey cakes, their sticky sweetness irresistible. Against your better judgment, you reach out and taste one, but then realize you don't have anything to pay with. The baker frowns, his eyes narrowing. To him, a person who eats without offering payment is a thief. You stammer something, but he grabs your arm. Before the situation worsens, a kind woman steps in. She offers the baker a small bundle of garlic in exchange for the cake you've just eaten. She glances at you knowingly, perhaps sensing your ignorance, and whispers, "Don't ever touch what you cannot pay for." Then she disappears back into the crowd. Gossip and power. Everywhere you go, people are talking. Merchants gossip about the pharaoh's taxes, about priests demanding more offerings, about neighbors cheating in trade. You realize that the marketplace isn't just for goods, it's for information. Rumors spread here faster than anywhere. In one corner, a group of men debate whether the Nile will flood enough next year. In another, women whisper about an official caught stealing grain. The souk is Egypt's newspaper, courtroom, and theater all in one. But as an outsider, you cannot participate. Their words flow past you like the river itself, and you remain adrift. Overwhelmed hours pass, though it feels like days. The heat bakes your skin, your throat is dry, and the constant noise is deafening. You think of your modern life, supermarkets with prices on neat labels, coins and bills in your pocket, shopping carts, and order online with one click. Here, every purchase is a battle, every deal a gamble, every smell a distraction. You feel lost, out of place, and utterly dependent on the kindness of strangers to survive even one market day. By the time you stagger out of the souk, the sun is setting. Your stomach is full of honey cake, but your nerves are shredded. The marketplace has shown you the heart of Egypt, vibrant, alive, colorful, and cruel. And you know once again, you would never last a day here. The role of women in ancient Egypt. When you first arrived in Egypt, you imagined women living quietly in the shadows, veiled and silenced, like in so many ancient societies you'd read about. But to your surprise, as you spend more time in this world, you discover that Egyptian women walked with a kind of authority, freedom and respect that sets them apart from their counterparts in Greece or Mesopotamia. Yet despite this relative equality, you quickly realize that surviving as a woman here was no simple task. A walk through the streets. One morning, as you wander through the crowded streets of Memphis, you notice women in linen dresses, some fine and pleated, others simple and rough. The heat presses on them the same way it presses on you, but unlike you, they move with practiced grace. Some are merchants at the stalls, bargaining fiercely with men over bread, beer, or cloth. Others carry baskets of figs on their heads, children tugging at their skirts. The surprising thing? No one seems to think twice about their presence in public. Egyptian law allowed women to own property, start businesses, inherit wealth, and even go to court without a man's permission. If you had expected them to be voiceless, you'd be wrong. Still, while the law recognizes them, the weight of expectation remains. A woman was still judged by her ability to marry, bear children, and maintain her household. The house of the mistress. You are invited into the home of a middle-class family. The husband works as a scribe, but it is his wife who runs the household like a small kingdom. She manages the servants, organizes food storage, and oversees weaving for trade. You learn that women often controlled the household economy. They were the invisible managers of Egypt's prosperity. But there's no modern escape here. The housewife role isn't about comfort, it's about survival. Water must be hauled daily from the Nile. Bread must be baked in hot clay ovens. Flax must be spun into linen thread. Without a woman's tireless labor, the family collapses. As you watch, you realize you'd probably collapse from exhaustion after just one day. Beauty as power. In the marketplace, you notice women at the cosmetic stalls buying jars of malachite, green eye paint, kohl, black eyeliner, and red ochre for lips and cheeks. Beauty in Egypt wasn't just vanity, it was protection. They believed eye paint shielded them from the sun's glare and evil spirits. Perfumed oils were used to prevent body odor in the searing heat. Wealthy women took beauty to an art form. Wigs of human hair, scented cones of wax that melted into perfumed oils, jewelry of turquoise and lapis lazuli. But beauty was also currency. A woman's appearance could secure her a wealthy husband, elevate her family's social status, and grant her influence. To neglect your looks was almost as dangerous as neglecting your crops. Marriage and motherhood. Marriage in ancient Egypt wasn't sealed with priests or rituals. Instead, it was a practical contract. A woman brought a dowry, land, cattle, or servants, and the husband pledged to support her. Divorce was allowed, and women had the right to reclaim their dowry. On papyrus contracts, you read lines like, "I take her as my wife, and I will not deny her food, clothing, or rights." Yet beyond legal rights, society still measured a woman by her children. The title, Mistress of the House, was one of the greatest honors, and Mother of Sons was the highest. Childbirth, however, was a battlefield. With no modern medicine, women relied on spells, amulets of Tauret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, and the wisdom of midwives. Many mothers and infants did not survive. If you were suddenly placed in the body of an Egyptian woman, you'd face the terrifying gamble of childbirth with every pregnancy. No hospital, no pain relief, just prayers to the gods and hope. Women of power. Of course, not all Egyptian women were ordinary. Some rose to greatness. You hear stories of Hatshepsut, the queen who declared herself pharaoh and ruled as a king, wearing the ceremonial false beard. You learn about Nefertiti, whose beauty and political power made her a legend. Even Cleopatra, centuries later, would seduce empires with her wit and charm. But these women are the exceptions. For every Hatshepsut, there are millions of nameless women who lived and died in the heat of the Nile Valley. their lives etched into pottery shards and household tombs rather than monuments. The burden of laborers. You spend a day in a workers' village near the Valley of the Kings. Here, women grind grain for hours until their backs ache. Their hands blister from weaving. Their children cling to them as they balance endless chores. Food is scarce, and a bad flood year means hunger. Unlike the wealthy ladies of Memphis, these women will never wear gold jewelry or perfumed oils. Their beauty fades quickly under the sun, their bodies weathered by labor. And yet, when night falls, you hear them singing lullabies to their children, laughing with neighbors and sharing bread. Even in hardship, they carry a resilience you envy. Why you wouldn't last a day as a woman in ancient Egypt. It's easy to look at Egyptian women and admire their relative rights compared to other ancient civilizations. But the truth is, their lives were still a constant test of endurance. You'd struggle with the unending labor of maintaining a household without modern tools. You'd risk your life with every childbirth. You'd fight the scorching climate while keeping up appearances of beauty. You'd carry the weight of feeding, clothing, and raising a family in a world where survival was never guaranteed. And though women could inherit land, sue in court, and even rule as pharaoh, the vast majority lived and died in anonymity, their strength measured not in titles but in survival itself. As you fall asleep that night in a mud brick house, the laughter of women echoes in the courtyard. You realize that if you, a modern traveler, had to live one day in their sandals, you'd be crushed by the demands. These women, however, wore their struggles like a crown, quiet rulers of Egypt's daily life. Warriors of the Nile. The first sound that wakes you isn't the crow of a rooster or the call of a priest. It's the clang of bronze. Somewhere outside, soldiers are striking their weapons against shields in rhythm, a beat that chills you to the bone. When you step outside, the whole village is tense. Women hurry children indoors, and men gather at the edge of the settlement with makeshift weapons, sticks, sickles, and knives meant for farming, but now pressed into service for defense. The Nile's calm surface reflects only half the truth. Egypt, despite its greatness, is never truly at peace. The army of the pharaoh. You're dragged along by a local overseer, pressed into service for the pharaoh. Every man owes his king, he growls, thrusting a crude spear into your hand. The weapon feels heavy and unwieldy, nothing like the polished tools of modern warfare. Soon you're marching with a group of conscripts toward the open desert plain. Ahead, rows of professional soldiers stand in formation, their skin oiled, their kilts neat, their shields polished. Bronze helmets glint under the sun, and short curved swords, kopeshes, hang at their sides. These are the warriors of the Nile, the pharaoh's own army, trained to defend the kingdom and expand it. Beside them roll wooden chariots, pulled by sleek horses, their wheels bound with bronze for strength. The sight is magnificent, terrifying. You realize you're not prepared for this. Training in blood and dust. A commander barks orders, and suddenly the troops begin their drills. Lines of archers raise longbows taller than you, loosing arrows in perfect unison. The sound is like a storm breaking. Wooden targets shatter 100 meters away. You're forced to mimic the motions. The bowstring cuts into your fingers. Your shot falls pathetically short, earning laughter from the soldiers. The gods favor strong arms, not weaklings, one jeers. But there is no room for weakness here. In Egypt, soldiers aren't just fighters. They are symbols of order, defenders of Ma'at, the divine balance. Every battle they fight is painted as a war against chaos itself. And you? You're nothing but a trembling intruder trying to survive another hour. The clash at the border. By midday, the pharaoh's army marches. Dust rises like smoke as thousands of sandals strike the earth in rhythm. You're shoved into a column, the sun beating down, sweat pouring until your clothes cling like a second skin. The destination, Egypt's borderlands. Raiders from the desert tribes have been attacking caravans, and today the pharaoh's warriors will crush them. You feel your heartbeat in your ears as the enemy appears in the distance. They are lean, wiry men with dark cloth wrapped around their faces, wielding spears and axes, mounted on swift horses. They howl like jackals as they charge. The Egyptian commander raises his hand, and the archers unleash a deadly rain. The air fills with the hiss of arrows, and the first wave of raiders collapses before they even touch the line. But many more follow, screaming with fury. And then, the chariots move. Thunder of chariots. 2 horses pull each chariot at blinding speed, the wheels rattling across the earth. An archer stands in the back, loosing arrows with deadly accuracy while the driver controls the horses. The combination is devastating, scattering raiders left and right. You can hardly believe what you're seeing. The precision, the power. The Pharaoh's army doesn't just fight. It crushes its enemies beneath discipline and divine favor. But the chaos of battle soon reaches you. A raider lunges, spear raised. Instinct takes over. You thrust your crude weapon forward. The impact vibrates through your arms as the man falls, his cry silenced in the dust. You drop your spear, horrified. The blood on your hands feels unreal, sticky, heavy. There's no time to process. Another soldier shoves you forward, shouting for you to hold the line. Victory, and its cost. By sunset, the battle is over. The desert is littered with broken spears, fallen men, and the cries of the wounded. The Egyptians are victorious, of course. To them, Pharaoh's will is divine. Defeat is unthinkable. Yet victory feels hollow to you. You sit on the ground, trembling, watching soldiers strip weapons from the dead and load bodies onto carts. The smell of blood, sweat, and sand chokes the air. A priest walks among the corpses, sprinkling water and chanting prayers to appease the gods. Life and death are never separate here. Both belong to the Nile, to Egypt, to eternity. You wonder if you'll ever sleep again without hearing the clash of bronze and the screams of men. Why you wouldn't last a day as an Egyptian warrior. The truth strikes you hard. You lack the training to fight with sword, spear, or bow. You lack the discipline to march endlessly under the burning sun. You lack the belief that every battle is sacred, guided by gods and Pharaoh alike. In ancient Egypt, warriors aren't just soldiers. They are instruments of divine order, tools of empire. For them, glory lies in service, and death in battle can mean eternal honor. For you, it's only terror. Every heartbeat in this world of bronze and blood reminds you, survival here isn't just unlikely, it's almost impossible. You wake to the sharp crack of a whip. At first you think it's thunder, but then you see the truth. A row of men and women, their backs bent and shoulders trembling, dragging massive stone blocks under the blazing sun. Overseers stand above them, whips in hand, their eyes cold. You're no longer an observer in Egypt. You've been thrown into its harshest reality, the life of a slave. Slavery was woven deeply into the fabric of ancient Egyptian society. Unlike the modern idea of slavery being only about race or ethnicity, Egypt's slaves came from many sources. Captured prisoners of war, criminals, people who sold themselves or their children to escape famine, and foreigners brought through trade. And once enslaved, the path to freedom was rare and harsh. An overseer snarls at you and points toward a group of servants hauling water jars from the Nile to a nobleman's villa. You stumble to obey, but the jar is so heavy it nearly breaks your arms. The others glare at you. Your weakness could get them all whipped. You try to balance it against your hip, but your soft modern body isn't trained for this endless labor. Inside the noble villa, life feels like another world. The owner reclines on a low couch, fanned by 2 slaves, while another massages scented oils into his skin. He gestures with lazy fingers, and a servant instantly kneels to adjust his sandals. Every corner of the house hums with servitude, cooks grinding grain, maids weaving linen, water carriers rushing back and forth. Their faces are blank, trained not to show anger or hope. You learn quickly that slaves were not all treated equally. Some, like field workers, lived brutal lives in near starvation, their backs permanently bent. Others, who served inside temples or noble households, had slightly better conditions. A skilled scribe or craftsman might even gain respect, though never true freedom. But no matter the job, you were still property. That night, you collapse on a reed mat beside the other house servants. The air smells of sweat and smoke. A boy, barely 12, lies beside you. He was sold by his family during a drought. Across from you, an older woman whispers a prayer to Isis for mercy. You listen, heart pounding, realizing there's no choice in this world. You work, or you suffer. The next day you're sent to the fields. It's harvest season and every pair of hands is needed. The Nile flood has left behind rich black soil, perfect for growing wheat. But that blessing doesn't make the labor lighter. You bend with a sickle in hand, hacking at the stalks under the overseer's eyes. The sun scorches your neck, your throat feels like fire, and sweat blinds your eyes. You cut too slowly, and the lash snaps across your back. Pain explodes, raw and stinging. The other workers don't even flinch. They've seen worse. As hours crawl on, you begin to understand the crushing monotony of servitude. Day after day, the same tasks: hauling, cutting, grinding, serving. And if you falter, punishment follows swiftly. Some slaves try to run away, but capture means mutilation or death. Others cling to faith, hoping the gods will reward them in the afterlife for their suffering. At night, rumors circulate among the servants. One tells of a slave who rose to power because he could read and write, eventually serving in Pharaoh's court. Another whispers of war prisoners used as labor in quarries until their bodies simply gave out. A few claim that masters sometimes freed their most loyal servants as an act of generosity. But those are rare tales, like faint stars in a sky full of darkness. The overseer drags you one evening to help repair a temple wall. As you hand stones to the masons, you catch glimpses of hieroglyphs carved into the surface. Prayers, spells, dedications to gods. You wonder if the slaves who carried these stones centuries ago left their silent cries hidden between the lines of those carvings. And yet, there's a strange resilience among the people around you. Despite chains of servitude, they sing in the fields, their voices low but steady, keeping rhythm with the swing of sickles. They share scraps of bread, laugh quietly at overseers when their backs are turned, and teach children songs so they don't grow up only knowing fear. You realize then that survival here isn't just about food and rest. It's about spirit, the unbreakable will to endure, even when the world calls you nothing more than property. When you finally collapse on your mat again, bruised and blistered, you whisper to yourself, "I wouldn't last a week like this," and you know it's true. After surviving the heat, hunger, diseases, and endless rules of daily life in ancient Egypt, you may think the temples offered some relief. After all, aren't temples supposed to be places of peace and spirituality? Not quite. In ancient Egypt, temples weren't just holy sites, they were the beating heart of politics, wealth, and power. And the priests who controlled them? They might have been more intimidating than the pharaoh himself. Temples, the house of the gods. To the Egyptians, a temple wasn't for the people. Ordinary villagers weren't allowed past the outer walls. The temple was the literal house of the god, and only priests were permitted to enter its sacred chambers. Imagine living in a society where your gods are right there, but you're never allowed to see them. You'd only catch a glimpse during processions, when the priests carried the sacred statues outside. For the priests, though, this exclusivity gave them enormous authority. They were the caretakers of the gods themselves. And since Egyptians believed that keeping the gods happy was necessary for survival, the flooding of the Nile, the fertility of crops, the very rising of the sun, priests held incredible influence. If you lived in Egypt, your entire life depended on men you would never meet. Becoming a priest. You couldn't just decide to become a priest. Many were chosen from elite families, handed the role like a privilege. Others were trained for years, memorizing endless rituals, hymns, and rules. Priests shaved their entire bodies daily, including eyebrows, to remain ritually pure. They wore crisp white linen, symbolic of cleanliness, and bathed several times a day in sacred pools. Now imagine yourself as a farmer, sweaty and covered in dust from the fields. You look up at these pristine, freshly bathed men chanting in polished temples, and you realize They are closer to the gods than you will ever be. The distance between commoners and priests was not just social, it was spiritual. Daily duties, feeding the gods. Every morning, priests performed elaborate rituals to wake the gods. The statue of the god inside the sanctuary was washed, anointed with oils, dressed in fine garments, and presented with food offerings: bread, meat, beer, fruits. The shocking part? After the god had absorbed the spiritual essence of the food, the leftovers were eaten by the priests themselves. So, while common Egyptians were eating barley porridge for the 100th time, priests were feasting on temple offerings. It's no wonder temple service was considered a position of privilege. But being a priest wasn't all luxury. The rules were suffocating. Priests had to abstain from sex during service, avoid certain foods, and maintain strict ritual purity. Break the rules, and the god might punish not just you, but the entire land. The weight of responsibility was immense. Politics of the gods' priests didn't just serve the gods, they sometimes challenged the pharaoh himself. While Pharaoh was technically the high priest of every temple, in practice, local priesthoods grew so powerful that they could sway political decisions. In later dynasties, priests of Amun at Thebes wielded so much influence that they acted like kings in their own right. So if you were unlucky enough to live during those times, you'd be caught in the middle of a silent tug of war. Pharaoh on one side, priests on the other. Whose rules would you follow? Whose punishments would you fear? Ordinary people and temples. For the common Egyptian, the temple was both awe-inspiring and frustrating. You could bring offerings, pray outside, and join festivals, but the mysteries within were forever hidden. The gods' images were kept locked away, revealed only on special occasions. Festivals were your only chance to celebrate with the gods. During the Opet festival in Thebes, the statue of Amun was carried through the streets, while people sang, danced, and drank beer in his honor. For a few days, you felt connected to the divine. But once the festival ended, the gods returned to their inner sanctuaries and the gates closed again. Why you wouldn't last a day with the priests. Now imagine being chosen as a temple worker for a day. At dawn, you're woken to shave every inch of your body. You bathe in cold water 4 times before the sun is high. You enter a silent, incense-filled sanctuary, where every gesture must be perfect, every chant memorized. One mistake, one wrong word, and you fear divine wrath. By midday, you're starving, but you can't eat just anything. You must wait until the gods' offerings are served. And when night falls, you're exhausted, but you can't relax with your family or enjoy life's simple pleasures. Your body, your diet, your very thoughts belong to the god. And if you weren't a priest, you'd live your entire life working for temples you could never enter, honoring gods you could never see, and watching powerful men control your destiny from behind sacred walls. Final thought. The priests of ancient Egypt weren't villains, but they were gatekeepers. They guarded divine secrets, managed immense wealth, and enforced spiritual rules that ordinary people could never fully understand. Whether you admired them or resented them, your survival depended on them. And so, in ancient Egypt, temples weren't simply houses of prayer, they were the axis on which society turned. If you ever stepped into their world, you wouldn't last a day. The gods demand your loyalty. By now, your journey through ancient Egypt has already tested your courage, your patience, and your survival skills. But if you thought hard labor, harsh deserts, and powerful pharaohs were the end of your troubles, think again. In Egypt, there was something more powerful than the king himself: the gods. And to last even a day, you needed not only strength and obedience, but also spiritual loyalty. The ever-present gods. The Egyptians lived under the watchful eyes of their gods every moment. Ra, the sun god, sailed across the sky each day, giving light and life. Anubis guarded the souls of the dead, while Osiris judged them in the afterlife. Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, protected homes, and Sobek, the crocodile god, ruled over the Nile's dangerous waters. Unlike today, Where religion may be a private matter, in ancient Egypt, it was survival. If you ignored rituals, skipped offerings, or disrespected a temple, you risked not only angering the priests but also inviting curses, droughts, or disease upon your entire community. Imagine this. You wake up before sunrise and forget to say a prayer to Ra. The villagers glare at you, whispering that your carelessness might stop the sun from rising tomorrow. To them, it was that serious. A day of worship. Every Egyptian day had religious duties. Offerings were made at shrines: bread, beer, meat, fruits, and incense. Temples weren't just holy places. They were the center of life. Farmers brought their first harvest, fishermen their best catch, and craftsmen their finest work to honor the gods. You, a modern outsider, might think, why waste food and resources on statues? But in ancient Egypt, this wasn't optional. Refuse to give an offering, and the priests might accuse you of angering the gods. And believe me, people feared the priests almost as much as they feared the pharaoh. The temple priests claimed to speak for the gods, and their words carried enormous power. If they said you were cursed, people would avoid you. If they said you had displeased Anubis, nobody would help bury you properly. A fate worse than death itself, because without burial, your soul could never reach the afterlife. The fear of divine punishment. Every Egyptian believed that the afterlife was real. Death wasn't an ending, but a journey to another world, the Duat. To enter it, your heart would be weighed against the feather of truth, Ma'at. If your heart was heavy with sin, the monstrous Ammit, a beast with the head of a crocodile, body of a lion, and back legs of a hippo, would devour your soul forever. So imagine living each day with the weight of judgment on your shoulders. A single lie, a broken oath, or even an impure thought could tip the scales against you in death. You would spend your life terrified of every mistake. Now imagine being thrown into this world as a modern person, accustomed to freedom of thought. You might laugh at rituals, question a priest, or refuse to kneel to a statue. That alone could seal your doom. In ancient Egypt, faith was not a choice. It was law, sacred animals. Another challenge would be Egypt's sacred animals. Cats, crocodiles, ibises, and bulls weren't just animals. They were living symbols of gods. To harm one, even by accident, was a serious crime. For example, if you accidentally stepped on a cat's tail and it died, you could face execution. Historians tell stories of entire mobs killing foreigners who dared harm a sacred animal. Crocodiles were worshipped in temples of Sobek. Even snakes, though feared, were linked to divine powers. Now think of how you'd react if you found a venomous cobra in your house. Modern instinct says, kill it. But in Egypt, killing a sacred snake could bring divine wrath upon your entire family. You'd have to live with these creatures as untouchable neighbors. Festivals of the gods' life wasn't all fear and punishment, though. The Egyptians also celebrated their gods with massive festivals. Boats carried sacred statues through the Nile, music filled the streets, and people feasted and danced for days. But even here, there were strict rules. The sacred procession had to be followed in silence, the rituals performed with exact precision. One mistake, dropping an offering, playing the wrong song, or standing in the wrong place, could be seen as a grave insult. As an outsider, you'd struggle to understand the complex rituals, the chants, and the gestures. You might clap at the wrong time, laugh at a costume, or speak out of turn, and instantly be marked as a disrespectful foreigner. The pharaoh, as a god. To make matters worse, the pharaoh wasn't just a ruler. He was considered a living god on earth. His word was divine law. To bow too slowly, to speak his name without respect, or to question his authority was like insulting the gods themselves. Imagine standing in front of Pharaoh Ramses II. You're nervous, sweating, and forget to bow properly. Guards glare at you. Priests frown. In that moment, your mistake could mean exile, punishment, or worse. In Egypt, loyalty wasn't just politics, it was religion. Why you wouldn't last. In the end, surviving in ancient Egypt wasn't only about food, heat, or disease. It was about belief. You had to surrender your thoughts, your doubts, and even your freedom to the gods and their priests. Every action was judged, every word weighed, every ritual sacred. If you were skeptical, rebellious, or careless, you wouldn't last a single day. Because in ancient Egypt, it wasn't just about living for yourself, it was about living for the gods. And if you failed them, no one could save you. The desert that never forgives. After days of adjusting to the life of the Nile Valley, you've grown somewhat used to the strict food rations, the endless sun, and the biting sand. But today, you make a mistake that would seal your fate. One so simple and yet so deadly. You step outside the protection of the cultivated land and into the desert. The ancient Egyptians respected the desert as both a sacred and dangerous realm. To them, it was the domain of Seth, the god of chaos, storms, and destruction. While the Nile brought life, the desert represented death. Venturing too far without preparation was an invitation to disaster. The illusion of safety. At first, you think the desert doesn't look too intimidating. The golden sand shimmers in the sunlight, and the horizon seems to call you forward. You might even convince yourself that you could walk a short distance, see some dunes, and then return. But almost immediately, you feel the scorching heat wrapping around you like an oven. The sand burns your feet even through your sandals. The Nile breeze disappears, replaced by the suffocating stillness of air that feels like it's weighing on your chest. Within an hour, your mouth is bone dry. Sweat drips down your forehead, and with each step, you feel weaker. You look around. Nothing but endless sand. The green fields of the Nile Valley are gone from sight, hidden behind a haze of shimmering heat. You try to turn back, but the dunes have shifted under the wind, and now everything looks the same. The threat of the desert. To the Egyptians, the desert was not just a natural hazard, it was a mythical battlefield. Here they believed Seth fought endlessly against Osiris and Horus, seeking to overthrow the balance of Ma'at. The scorching sun, the violent sandstorms, the venomous snakes, and scorpions were all considered weapons of chaos. And you are standing right in the middle of it. The silence is unbearable. No birds, no water, just the sound of the wind, whispering like voices mocking you. Then suddenly a gust rises, and fine grains of sand lash against your skin like tiny blades. A sandstorm begins to brew on the horizon. The sandstorm. It hits faster than you expect. The sky turns orange, then red as walls of sand rise into the air, blotting out the sun. You try to shield your face, but the storm is merciless. The sand gets into your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth. It scratches your throat like shards of glass. You remember that Egyptians traveling through deserts always brought camels, water skins, and guides. Alone, unprepared, and untrained, you are as vulnerable as a leaf in the wind. Your mind panics. Which way is back? Where is the Nile? But direction is meaningless in a storm like this. Even seasoned desert caravans sometimes lost their way, their bones left buried under shifting dunes. Creatures of Seth's realm. The storm passes after what feels like hours, though it's only minutes, but the silence that follows is not comforting. You notice movement near the rocks. Out slithers a horned viper, its scales blending with the sand. Egyptians feared these snakes, and for good reason. Their venom could kill within hours. Nearby, under a rock, a fat-tailed scorpion crawls out. Ancient Egyptians often burned scorpion effigies in magical rituals to keep them away, knowing how deadly their sting could be. You freeze. One wrong step and your suffering will end not by thirst, but by venom. Thirst and madness. Your lips crack. Your tongue swells. Every part of you screams for water, but there is none. In ancient Egypt, survival without the Nile was nearly impossible. Travelers carried jars of beer, water, and even dried fish for the journey. Without it, the desert turned humans into fragile shells in mere hours. You begin hallucinating. You see visions of oases, palm trees heavy with dates, cool pools of water. But as you rush forward, you fall face first into the sand. It's only a mirage. This is what Egyptians feared, the madness of the desert, where the mind breaks before the body does. The return to the valley. Somehow, through sheer desperation, you stagger back toward the faint green edge of the Nile Valley. By luck, or perhaps the mercy of Hathor, goddess of motherhood and protection, you stumble into the irrigation fields again. A group of farmers sees you collapse. They drag you to shade, pouring precious water over your lips. They shake their heads, muttering to each other. A fool wandered into Seth's land. He is lucky to return. They give you bread dipped in beer, small sips of water, and wait as your body slowly recovers. But they also warn you. The desert takes those who are arrogant. Remember this. Without the Nile, there is no life. Reflection. You realize now why the ancient Egyptians were so dependent on their river. The desert wasn't just next door. It was death itself, waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to wander into it. To live in ancient Egypt meant respecting the balance between life and death, order and chaos. The Nile gave, the desert took. And you? You almost became another skeleton lost beneath the dunes. The wrath of the Nile, famine, floods, and survival. Imagine for a moment that you are standing on the banks of the Nile River in ancient Egypt. The sun is blazing above your head, and the wide river stretches out before you like a lifeline cutting through the desert. Everything, from the food people eat, the homes they live in, the gods they worship, even the way they measure time, depends on the Nile's cycles. In modern times, we turn on taps and expect water. But in ancient Egypt, a single year of the river rising too high or too low could decide whether thousands lived or starved. Now ask yourself, could you survive in a world where your life depends entirely on a river's mood? The fragile balance of the Nile. Each year, the Nile was expected to flood in late summer, bringing rich silt from upstream. This black earth, called Kemet, made farming possible in a desert land. If the floods were just right, farmers could grow barley, wheat, onions, beans, figs, and grapes. But the river was unpredictable. If it flooded too much, entire villages, granaries, and homes would be washed away. People would drown, livestock would vanish, and disease spread in the stagnant waters. If it didn't flood enough, crops would wither, fields turned to dust, and famine loomed like a shadow over the land. In both cases, ordinary Egyptians had no backup plan. There were no supermarkets, no international trade networks bringing in grain from abroad. When the Nile failed, so did Egypt. The terror of famine. Imagine sitting in your mud brick home as weeks pass without rain, the river lower than usual. The crops you planted die before harvest. Your neighbors whisper that the gods are angry. Hunger gnaws at your stomach every night, and the smell of rotting fish on the banks reminds you that the river isn't providing like it used to. You're not alone. Entire villages would face starvation. Hieroglyphic records and archaeological evidence show that during periods of drought, people were forced to eat whatever they could find: roots, wild grasses, even insects. In the worst cases, there are hints of cannibalism in Egyptian texts describing dark years. Think about it. Could you handle the slow torture of hunger, watching your children's bodies grow thin and frail, with no escape except waiting for the Nile to rise again? The flood that destroys. But famine wasn't the only danger. Some years, the river swelled too much. Picture a roaring, unstoppable wall of water crashing into the farmlands. Mud brick houses crumble like sandcastles. People cling to palm trees hoping to survive. Entire harvests stored in granaries dissolve into soggy ruin. And the worst part? Disease follows. Stagnant pools become breeding grounds for mosquitoes, parasites, and bacteria. You wake up with fever and chills, your skin crawling with bites. There's no medicine, no antibiotics, no mosquito nets, just prayers to Hapi, the Nile god, and the hope that priests' rituals might calm the river's rage, the pharaoh's responsibility. Now here's something you might not expect. Survival wasn't just your problem, it was the pharaoh's too. Pharaohs were seen as gods on earth, the link between mortals and the divine. If the Nile failed, people blamed the pharaoh for angering the gods. Imagine the pressure. You are the ruler of millions, and everyone believes your spiritual power controls the river. Priests demand sacrifices. Workers beg for grain from royal storehouses, and whispers of rebellion stir among starving farmers. Texts from the First Intermediate Period, around 2200 BCE, describe pharaohs losing control when the Nile repeatedly failed. Chaos erupted. Tombs were looted, law collapsed, and Egypt nearly tore itself apart. So not only would you have to survive famine and flood, you'd have to live under rulers desperate to keep control, sometimes punishing their own people to show strength. Superstitions and desperation. In times of disaster, fear bred superstition. Egyptians believed evil spirits or angry gods caused bad floods or droughts. Priests organized rituals, sacrifices, and chants along the riverbanks. If you lived then, you might be forced to offer your last scraps of food to the temple, not because you wanted to, but because your neighbors believed that refusing would doom the entire village. Imagine watching your starving family but still handing over offerings to priests, terrified of being cursed if you didn't. Could you endure such hopeless faith, clinging to rituals while your stomach growled louder than the temple drums? Your chances of survival. So let's tally it up. You depend entirely on a river you can't control. A bad flood or drought means hunger, disease, or homelessness. Pharaohs and priests demand loyalty even when you're starving. No modern tools, medicine, or relief systems exist to save you. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single disaster year in ancient Egypt. Even the strongest villagers barely scraped by. Survival meant gambling with forces far beyond your control. Why you wouldn't last, think of your modern life. You check the weather on your phone, complain if food prices rise slightly, or stock up at the store before a storm. In ancient Egypt, none of that existed. The Nile ruled everything. And if it turned against you, there was no plan B. This is why the ancients both loved and feared their river. It was their god, their destroyer, and their only hope, all in one. Could you endure it? Probably not. 1 year of famine or flood, and you'd understand why survival in ancient Egypt was less about strength and more about pure, unpredictable luck. The final dawn. Returning from ancient Egypt. You open your eyes to find yourself back in the present day, lying on the cool marble floor of the museum. The golden amulet you carried in your hand has turned into nothing more than dust, slipping through your fingers. For a moment you wonder, was it a dream? Or had you truly traveled thousands of years into the past? Your body aches as if you had been walking barefoot on desert sand for days, and your mind still buzzes with the chants of priests and the pounding of festival drums. The smell of lotus and incense lingers faintly in your nose, as though the air of ancient Thebes still clung to you. You stagger to your feet. The hall is silent. Tourists wander past the Egyptian exhibit, staring at the very sarcophagus you saw opened in its original temple. None of them have any idea what lies beneath the surface of these artifacts. The pain, the hardship, the unbearable rules of survival in that ancient world. The lessons of a day in ancient Egypt. Looking back, you realize just how impossible it would have been for a modern person like you to survive even one single day in ancient Egypt. It was not simply the heat of the sun or the weight of the work, it was everything. The relentless labor. You were expected to obey without question, whether hauling stones for pyramids, bending your back in the fields, or serving in the palace. Rest was rare and disobedience was punished harshly. The social hierarchy. Every step of life was determined by your birth. Farmers remained farmers. Slaves remained slaves. Even priests, though powerful, were chained to rituals and endless duties. You had no chance to rise above your station. The harsh environment. The Nile brought life, yes, but also death. Crocodiles lurked in the waters, plagues spread through the marshes, and a single bad flood could mean famine. The desert's heat scorched your lungs while scorpions hid in the sand. The ever-watchful gods. Religion was not just belief, it was law. Every action had to honor the gods. A missed prayer or a broken ritual was seen as a threat to the entire kingdom. You felt the weight of divine judgment at every step, the lack of freedom. For us, living in the modern world with choices and independence, ancient Egypt felt like a gilded cage. The beauty of temples and palaces was breathtaking, but behind them lay oppression, silence, and fear. You realize now, those pyramids that stand so proudly today were not built for the people. They were built on the blood, sweat, and lives of thousands who had no choice but to obey. The final encounter. As you prepare to leave the museum, something catches your eye. On the far wall, a mural depicts a scene of judgment, the god Anubis weighing a human heart against the feather of Ma'at. Your breath catches. You've seen this before. You were there. The scales, the feather, the dark jackal god standing silently in the shadow of Osiris. It all comes rushing back. For a moment, the painted eyes of Anubis seem to turn toward you. You freeze, remembering his words in the temple. Mortals who trespass in time must return with wisdom or be cursed with ignorance forever. Did you bring wisdom? Or had you simply run away? You think of the scribe's ink-stained fingers, the farmer's blistered hands, the noblewoman's sorrow behind her painted eyes. They could not escape. They endured. And perhaps that was the lesson. Survival was not about freedom, but endurance. And suddenly, you feel the weight in your chest lift. You had returned not just with memories, but with understanding. Would you last a day? No. You know the answer clearly now. A modern soul like yours, raised with comfort, freedom, and choice, would crumble beneath the weight of ancient Egypt's demands. The sun would scorch your skin. The labor would break your body. The silence of unquestioned authority would crush your spirit. But at the same time, you carry with you a newfound respect. Those people were not simply faceless workers of history. They were human beings who lived, struggled, laughed, and wept under a system far larger than themselves. Their endurance carved monuments that outlast empires. Their suffering gave birth to wonders the world still marvels at. You walk out of the museum, the bright modern city buzzing around you. Cars roar past, neon signs glow. People carry phones in their hands like talismans of a new age. For the first time, you look at it all differently. The freedom to walk without fear, to speak your thoughts aloud, to choose your destiny. These are luxuries the people of ancient Egypt never had, and you vow never to take them for granted again. On the amulets whisper. As you step outside into the sunlight, a faint breeze brushes against your ear, carrying with it a whisper you can't quite explain. Perhaps it is only your imagination. Perhaps it is something more. Remember us. You pause, hand instinctively reaching for your pocket. The amulet is gone, crumbled into dust long ago. But you smile anyway. For though you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt, a part of ancient Egypt will last forever inside you.